Welcome back to the Podcasting Problem Solver. I am your host, Leah Bryant, podcast growth strategist and coach, here to help entrepreneurs just like you podcast strategically with more clarity and better results. All right, podcast search results are not random. If you've ever searched for your own show and wondered, why am I not showing up? Well, I want you to know first that it's not because Apple or Spotify is ignoring you, but they're ranking you based on two very specific systems, SEO and PSO. And once you understand the difference between the two, that's when you can finally start showing up on purpose instead of by accident. Or worse, not at all. Let's break this down because I've been getting a lot of questions in my DMs, emails from folks who are confused. You have one expert talking about SEO, another one is talking about PSO, and you're just sitting there with 47 Google tabs open, wondering, wait, what's all this alphabet soup about? So I am here to clear this up for you, okay? So PSO and SEO overlap, but they are not the same thing. SEO, which is the search engine optimization, is like the big umbrella. It's everything you do to help your podcast show up across the internet, on Google, Pinterest, YouTube, and so on, right? Think of it as the wide-reaching visibility piece of how new listeners discover you outside the podcasting apps. Now, PSO, which is podcast search optimization, sits under that umbrella. It focuses on how your show ranks and gets discovered inside podcast apps like Apple, Spotify, and so on. It's the in-app visibility layer, that part that helps you show up when someone types a topic directly into their favorite listening app. But I want you to hear me when I say this. Both matter. Let me repeat that again because it's that important. Both SEO and PSO matter. All caps, the end. Because they work together to help people actually find you. Now, here's the thing. Yes, you can focus on SEO by itself. And yes, you can focus on PSO by itself. But you know what? Both are valuable, right? The real magic happens when you focus on both. When your podcast ecosystem is optimized on the outside for the search engines like Google and on the inside for podcast directories like Apple and Spotify, that overlap is where visibility compounds. Because someone might discover you through a blog post or a pin that ranks on Google, thanks to SEO, right? Then subscribe to your show inside Apple Podcasts, thanks to PSO. That's how you create a true visibility loop. Your content keeps leading people back to your show, and your show keeps leading people deeper into your world. And that's exactly why people work with me, to be honest, because I understand both. I know how to bridge SEO and PSO so that your podcast doesn't just sound good, but it gets found. And that's also part of the reason why I created the Seamless Sprint. Because I want to help podcasters understand both SEO and PSO and set their shows up strategically for long-term success. Because when SEO and PSO, when they work together, you're not just producing episodes then. You're building a growth system that amplifies your authority, attracts those new listeners, and yes, drives results for your business. Here's how I want you to think about it. So SEO, yes, as we discussed, search engine optimization is what helps new audiences discover you outside the podcast app. Like we've said, Google, Pinterest, YouTube, and even ChatGPT now, right? It's the reason someone who's never heard of your show can still find your content when they type in something like how to grow a podcast or visibility tips for small business owners. SEO works a lot like an introduction. It's what puts you in front of fresh eyes and ears who are already searching for what you're talking about. This is why optimizing your show notes, blog posts, and episode titles matter so much, because they're like that, hello, nice to meet you moments. Now, PSO, podcast search optimization, is what helps existing podcast listeners find you inside those platforms like Apple and Spotify. These people are already tuned in somewhere. They're the ones opening the app, typing in the topic, and browsing. Think of it like this. SEO brings new listeners to your neighborhood. It gets them close enough to see your door, right? But PSO, that helps them find your house, step through the door, and start exploring. And consistency, well, that's what keeps them coming back week after week because they know you'll always be quote unquote open for business. Because if you've ever searched for a topic and noticed the same few podcasts keep showing up, you know what? That's not luck, friends. That's intentional optimization and consistent publishing working together to build trust with both the algorithm and your audience because they're both important, right? And maybe this is just the former fraud investigator in me, but I can't help but look for patterns. Fun fact, before I became a podcast growth coach, I spent over 9 years as a fraud investigator. And during that time, a previous employer brought in experts who actually trained the FBI in phone interrogation. It was pretty cool stuff. But the thing that they taught us was how to read between the lines, uncover what's really going on beneath the surface, and connect the dots that most people miss, and find the story that's hidden in the data. And you know what's even better about all of this is that I use these same skill sets every single day in podcast strategy. Because growing a podcast is about recognizing patterns, right? Reading the data, knowing which small adjustments create the biggest impact. And that's why I geek out about SEO and PSO. They're just systems that tell you where your podcast stands and how the platforms are interpreting your content. Now, once you understand these patterns, you can stop guessing and start optimizing. Yes. Now, a lot of people think that podcast search results are random or they're based truly on popularity. Well, you know what? That is not even close. No, sir. No, ma'am. Every podcast app uses a combination of signals to decide which shows to recommend and which ones quietly move down the list. I know what you're thinking. Okay, Leah, I need to know these signals. Don't worry, friends. I've got you. All right. So some of these signals are like your keywords in your show title and your episode title. That's how the algorithm knows what your show is about. If those keywords don't match what people are searching for, then guess what? Yes, you're invisible. And that's why I talk about why it's so important to have those keywords in your titles. And now your description, that's where the apps check if your overall theme and language align with what people are looking for. It's kind of like your show's elevator pitch, but for an algorithm. That's why we always say write for humans first and then the algorithm second. Next up is your publishing cadence. Because regular activity signals that your show is alive, current, and worth promoting. And last but not least is listener behavior. This is one that a lot of people forget or don't pay attention to. But it's things like how often people listen, follow, and finish episodes, plus keep coming back for more. So the more signals that you're giving the algorithm that your show is active and valuable, you know what's going to happen? That's right. The more visibility you're going to earn. But when you are publishing inconsistently, or maybe you're skipping optimizing your titles or leaving your descriptions vague, you know what you're doing? You're essentially whispering, hey, I might not be around next week. And you know what happens? With that whisper, the algorithm takes you at your word. So instead of showing your show to new listeners, you know what happens? It pushes other podcasts forward. The ones that post regularly, use strong keywords, and keep their audience engaged. And that's why this stuff matters so much more than people think. Because even a great show, it can get shuffled to the bottom of the list if it doesn't look active on the platforms, right? And this is where the execution and attraction phase of my Seamless Podcast Framework really shine. Because execution is kind of like your foundation. It's the behind-the-scenes structure that keeps your show running smoothly, right? It includes your publishing cadence, how you format your episodes, your show setup, and even the tools or templates you use to stay consistent. Now, when your execution phase is strong, you're no longer scrambling to, I just got to get an episode out, right? You've got systems that support you. And that consistency sends a powerful signal to both your audience and the algorithm that this show is reliable. And we all want that, right? Then there's attraction, which is all about your discoverability. That's where your keywords, descriptions, and the metadata come into play. It's the strategy that helps new listeners actually find the content you've worked so hard to create. Now, if you heard the word metadata and you're like, your nose crinkled and you're like, what is she talking about? I want to quickly pop in here and say that podcast metadata is the information that describes your podcast, right? So think of like your title, the author name, which is your name. But then there's also the description, the category. All these things help, right? So we want to make sure that all this is embedded in your audio. And if you have questions about that, let me know and I can do a separate episode because I think it's really important to know all of this. All right. Now that we've explained the metadata, let's continue. Think of execution as the engine that keeps your podcast moving and attraction as the headlights that make sure people can see you coming. You actually need both to go anywhere. And when those two phases work together, your show starts to build momentum naturally. And that's what we want. That's when you see your episodes ranking higher, your audience growing faster, and your podcast becoming one of the best marketing tools, not because you're working harder, but because your systems and strategies are working for you. And I see this all the time with my clients. Once they lock in their publishing rhythm and tighten up their SEO, things start clicking. Suddenly, their show isn't just part of their marketing, it's actually what's driving it. Now let's talk about why consistency is such a big deal for PSO. So podcast directories reward reliability, plain and simple. If you publish on a predictable schedule, even if that's just once a week or every other week, you're sending a signal that says, hey there, I'm here. The show is active, alive, and worth recommending. Think of it like a restaurant. If it's open, serving great food, and there's always a line of happy customers, the DoorDash platforms, or in this case, the podcast apps, they want to seat more people at your table, right? It's proof that people like what you're serving and that they'll keep coming back. But if you close your doors for weeks or months at a time, the algorithm is going to assume that you've shut down the kitchen. And honestly, so do your listeners. Because from their perspective, when a show goes quiet, it feels like the host has disappeared. They stop checking for new episodes. They find new shows to fill the space in their routine. And when you finally come back, you're not just fighting the algorithm, but then you have to rebuild that audience trust too. And here's another layer that a lot of podcasters may not realize. A 2023 Apple Podcast iOS update changed how downloads are counted. So if listeners stop engaging with your show for a few weeks, you know what Apple does? They will pause those automatic downloads. You know what that means? I know. Your numbers are going to dip. Not because people don't like your content, but because inconsistency tells the platform, hey, maybe they're done listening. To Apple, fewer downloads equal less activity, which directly affects your PSO signals, right? So consistency doesn't just help your audience remember you, it literally keeps your podcast data alive. That's why it's not just a tech signal, it's a relationship signal. It tells both the platforms and your listeners that you're dependable. And you know what, friends? Dependability builds authority. Yep. So even if you can't post every week, pick a schedule you can actually sustain. Because in podcasting, reliability beats frequency every single time. So, what can you do right now to boost both SEO and PSO? Well, friends, you're in the right place because I am here and I'm going to make it simple for you. Because optimizing your show doesn't have to feel like you're eating a bowl of tech soup, right? Maybe in this case, alphabet soup. Here are 3 practical things you can do this week to strengthen your discoverability on and off the podcast platforms. Tip number 1, use searchable titles. Yes, this is where so many podcasters slip up. Instead of getting creative or clever, use the actual words your ideal listener would type into the search bar. Also, heads up, this coming Thursday's quick win or the next episode if you're listening into the future, is all about clear over clever titles, so don't miss that. If they're looking for, let's say, how to grow a podcast audience, then I'm definitely not going to title my episode The Growth Chronicles because that is not telling the listener or you what in the world the episode is about. So you want to say exactly what it is. That whole right for humans first, add keywords for the algorithm second. Search engines and podcast apps both scan your titles first. So clear beats cute every single time. All right, tip number 2, write your episode descriptions with those keywords in mind. Think of your description as both an invitation and a map. You want it to tell listeners what to expect and tell search engines what you're talking about. A couple of well-placed keywords per paragraph are plenty. You're writing for humans first, right? And those algorithms second. And here's the bonus that I want you to remember. Those same descriptions will also help you with Google SEO. So they're pulling double duty for visibility. Hooray! All right, tip number 3, stick to a consistent publishing cadence. I need you to hear me when I say this. Come back if you're doing something because I have this conversation a lot with folks. Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever works for you in your capacity is what's going to work. If you're publishing weekly and it's a busy season in your life and you need to go bi-weekly, do it. Just let your audience know what you're doing, okay? Because the key is sustainability. When your audience and the platforms know when to expect you, everything else becomes easier. Engagement, downloads, and even ranking. Think of these 3 steps as your podcast foundation for discoverability. Whether your show only needs a few focus tweaks or a full rebrand to match where your business is right now, the key here is intention. Strategic changes, whether they're big or small, are what build momentum over time, right? And here's the best part. When you align these with the execution and attraction phases of my seamless podcast framework, the visibility starts to compound. That's when you start seeing long tail results, more listeners finding you from old episodes, more traffic to your website, and more leads coming from people who've never even heard of you until they typed a keyword you optimized for. Because SEO and PSO aren't about gaming the system, they're about making it easier for the right people to find you, trust you, and take the next step, that's right, with you. So here's a quick story. A client of mine came into my seamless sprint feeling very frustrated. She was publishing amazing episodes. Seriously, her content was gold, thoughtful, helpful, and exactly what her audience needed. But her release schedule, well, it was kind of all over the place. She would release an episode, skip a couple weeks, post another month later, then disappear for a while. And every time she'd open her analytics, her downloads were flat. She told me, Leah, I don't understand. People tell me they love my episodes, but no one new is finding them. Well, that's what we focused on in her sprint. Tightening her systems in the execution phase and improving visibility in the attraction phase. We mapped out a realistic cadence for her she could actually sustain, right? Created a simple production checklist and optimized her episode titles and her descriptions so every new release used keywords her ideal listeners were actually searching for. And within 6 weeks, no rebrand, no paid ads, her show gained popularity in her category. Her audience started growing steadily, leads picked up, and her podcast finally started working for her business instead of against it. And that, my friends, is the power of combining PSO, SEO, and consistency. When your systems and your visibility strategy work together, that's when momentum starts to compound. So here's your takeaway today. Search results aren't random. Nope. And they reward strategy, execution, and attraction. All 3 pillars of the Seamless Podcast Framework. Now, when your show is built with these 3 in place, you stop relying on luck and you start building results on purpose. Strategy is where it starts, right? Making sure your podcast has a clear purpose aligned with your business goals is the foundation that tells your listeners where every episode is headed. Execution is the system, your publishing cadence, right? Your workflow, your follow through. It's what makes your show reliable to both your audience and the algorithm. Attraction is how people find you through optimized titles, descriptions, metadata, keywords, consistent visibility, right? It's where SEO and PSO really start working for you. And when these three work together, you know what happens? Yep, momentum becomes the natural outcome. And that's when you start seeing consistent growth because higher visibility and more of the right listeners are finding you week after week. If you treat your podcast like the growth tool it's meant to be and not just a place to publish content, you will see your visibility expand, your audience grow, and your authority strengthen with every episode. And that's exactly what we do inside my Seamless Sprint. We walk through these phases together and rebuild your podcast so it supports your goals, your audience, and your business growth. Because when your show runs on strategy instead of stress, momentum becomes inevitable. I've seen this transformation over and over and over again inside the sprint. One of my clients, who is a mindset and productivity coach, came to me ready to give up on her podcast. She was putting in the work, planning, recording, editing, writing, promoting, but the results weren't showing up. And after we repositioned her show, optimized her SEO and PSO, and then tightened her workflow, everything shifted. Within 2 weeks, her downloads increased by 10%. Her title started ranking higher in search, and her existing followers began listening consistently. But the part that stuck the most with me was that she said, quote, "Leah didn't just help me optimize my podcast. She helped me fall in love with podcasting again." I mean, goodness gracious, mic drop, episode could be over. My life has been made. That makes my heart happy. And that's the power of having strategy, execution, and attraction working together. And that's exactly what we do inside this Seamless Sprint. If you're ready to make your podcast easier to find and finally start ranking where you belong, I'd love to help you do it. You can book a podcast growth discovery call using the link below. It's a no-pressure chat where we'll look at what's working, what's not, and whether the sprint is the right next step for you. Now, if you don't want to hop on a call, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram. Feel free to send me a Telegram, a Boxer. I'm in all the places, right? Always open to have chats and answer questions. My servant heart is always here to help you. And if you just want to keep learning and applying these strategies on your own for now, well, make sure that you're subscribed to my weekly newsletter. It's full of practical tips to help your show grow sustainably without the burnout, right? Guessing or gimmicks. And when you join the newsletter and you get that welcome email, hit reply and you could put SEO, PSO, SOS. Or you can send smoke signals or throw up the back call. Whatever you need to do, and I will respond. Until next time, keep podcasting with purpose. Keep showing up consistently. Keep those episodes and your podcast optimized because every single episode you publish strengthens that SEO and PSO. And as always, keep it seamless, and I'll see you next time.